Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to lesson 89 of Chef's Apprentice, learning to cook like a pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is prawn, shiitake, and sugar snap pea tempura. In this preparation, you will learn to make tempura batter and to cook tempura. The challenges are to make light and airy tempura batter and cooked tempura that is light and airy, not greasy. Most recipes for tempura batter call for egg. Using egg, I have never been able to come close to the airiness of the tempura I've had in Japan or in fine Japanese restaurants in the US. So I don't use egg and I get good results. Feel free to substitute or add ingredients like scallion segments or asparagus or green beans. Techniques today are peeling prawns, stemming mushrooms, bringing to a boil and simmering, making a dipping sauce, making a tempura batter, deep frying, keeping warm, and plating. So let's start cooking. Okay, let's talk about the mise en place for lesson 89. We're going to need some prawns, and large shrimp are sometimes called prawns. Technically there are differences between shrimp and prawns, but when I use large shrimp, I usually call them prawns. Now these are U8 to 12, which means that there are 8 to 12 of these per pound. And they need to have been peeled, leave the tail on, devein them, and then you want to blot them dry. And then I want to take a paper towel or a towel and press any moisture out of the tail of each one. I'm only going to do that on camera one time, but the idea is that we're going to be deep frying these, and we don't want there to be excess moisture in there. We want to squeeze that out to get a nice crisp tail that way. Okay. Now we're going to keep these refrigerated. I keep them uncovered so that they stay dry in the fridge. Okay. Then we're also going to need to have some shiitake mushrooms, and if you're going to make for the number of people in the description as a small plate, you'll need 24 shiitake mushrooms. You've removed the stems. Keep the stems to make mushroom stock. You also need to have some sugar snap peas, and you'll need to have 24 of those for the number of people in the description. All right, and that's going to equate to I think it was for 8 in the description. So that's 2 prawns per person, and 3 shiitakes and 3 sugar snaps per person. You also need to have a cup of flour, and we're going to use a pinch of sea salt. I have some Malden sea salt here. We'll need to have 1 cup of cold water with a few ice cubes in it. This is to represent that. I don't have that right now. I'm going to make it a little later, so I don't want the ice cubes to melt. We also need to have 2 cups of dashi. I have a separate lesson on making dashi, and I've just thawed 2 cups that I had in the freezer. We need to have some mirin and some shoyu, or Japanese soy sauce, and I'm using the good stuff today. This is going to go into the dipping sauce, so I'm using a good shoyu. Then we'll need to have a daikon radish or other radish. Now this isn't a radish, it's a carrot, but I don't have the daikon radish yet. It's on its way, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to find daikon today. So if I don't, I'm going to use, if I can find it, I'll use a daikon radish. If I can't find that, I'll use any other kind of a radish. And if you were in a situation where you just don't have any radishes, you could use a carrot. Now the radish is going to give a little bit of extra flavor to the dipping sauce, and it's traditional to use daikon in Japan. If you use carrot, it's not really going to give it extra flavor, it's just going to give it some color, which is nice too. And then finally we'll need to have about 48 ounces, or at least 48 ounces of canola oil, which we're going to use to do the deep frying. Okay, that's all of the ingredients. We'll come back and I'll show you the equipment for lesson 89. All right, the equipment for lesson 89. We're going to need cutting board, and we're going to need a slicing knife. I think this might be one of the first lessons where we didn't actually use a chef's knife. We're going to need to have a slicing knife and a grater to grate the radish, the daikon or other radish. A saucepan and wooden spoon to make the dipping sauce. We'll also need to have a deep fryer. Now I'm going to use a deep frying pan. You could also use any kind of a heavy bottomed saucepan, but make sure it's fairly deep so that the oil is not splashing out of the pan. We'll also need to have a deep fry thermometer or a candy thermometer. You could also use an instant read. Slotted spoon, a bowl to have your flour in. I'm probably going to transfer this to a larger bowl so it's easier for me to mix in the salt later on. Then we'll need to have a fairly large bowl to mix the batter. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take that flour and we're going to put it through this strainer or through a sifter and sift it into the ice water. So you want to have a nice wide bowl so that the flour goes into the water and not everywhere else. Okay. Then for making tempura, traditionally you use cooking chopsticks. These are longer chopsticks. They're tied together at the end with a piece of string. You don't have to use them, but traditionally that's what you use to make tempura. You could use tongs and a slotted spoon. We'll also need to have a draining rack. So we have here a baking pan with a rack in it. We're going to be putting the pieces of tempura in there once they come out of the deep fryer, and we'll have some paper towels underneath of that rack there so that it absorbs the oil. Then we'll need to have tempura paper. Now, tempura paper is something that's used in Japan and Japanese restaurants. It absorbs extra oil and it makes for a nice presentation. And I bought this on Amazon. I'll provide a source in the description. We'll need to have some chopsticks. If we're trying to be authentic, we'll use pointed chopsticks. Japanese chopsticks are pointed. Chinese chopsticks are blunt tipped. Okay. Then we'll need to have some serving plates. Now, traditionally the way tempura would be served is you'd have a small plate in front of the person who's eating, in front of the guest, all right? And then you'd have a larger serving plate that the cook would put the pieces of tempura onto that serving plate when they're ready. And then the guest takes them off of the serving plate, puts them onto their own eating plate with the chopsticks, and then eats them. And then finally we'll need to have a bowl for the dipping sauce. And the bowl should be relatively wide so that you can dip the pieces of food into the sauce. Okay, that's all of the equipment that we need for lesson 89. We'll break, come back, and start cooking. Okay, we're going to make our tempura dipping sauce, which is a pretty simple sauce, but with a lot of flavor. We're going to start with 2 cups of dashi. There's a separate lesson on making dashi. And then we're going to add 1/2 cup of shoyu, or Japanese soy sauce, and 1/2 cup of mirin. And then we're going to stir that up really well. And then we're going to let that come to a boil. We want to bring it just to a boil. And when it gets to a boil, we're going to reduce the heat and let it simmer for about 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, it's just starting to come to a boil. We're going to turn down the heat to low and let it simmer for about 5 to 7 minutes. If it's still bubbling too much, use a heat diffuser under it or move it off the heat a little bit so it doesn't boil. Okay, we've been simmering for about 6 or 7 minutes. Let's taste it. Oh, nice. That'll be great to dip the tempura in. Now we're going to keep this at room temperature until we're ready to serve. Now, if you are serving, pretty soon, leave it at room temperature. But if it's going to be hours or the next day or whatever, put it in the fridge and then bring it back to room temperature before you serve. Okay, let's plate up our dipping sauce. So we want to have this ready before we do the deep frying, so that we can keep everything warm and get it served while it's warm and not have to be doing this after we've done any of the cooked any of the tempura. Okay, so we're putting some of the dipping sauce in each one of the dipping bowls for each one of your guests. And then I mentioned in the introduction that I didn't have the daikon yet, but we got this beautiful purple daikon. So we're just going to plate that up by adding some of it to each bowl. And it's going to spread out in the bowl like that. Just add some extra flavor. And let's taste it. Excellent. Okay, now we're going to kerf the shrimp. Now, if you've ever had shrimp tempura in a Japanese restaurant and you noticed that it was straight like this, not curled over like this, you might have wondered why. The reason is because they kerfed the back side and the underside of each one, which helps to prevent them from curling when they are deep fried. We're going to do this to each one. The curves are about 3/8 of an inch apart. Okay, now we're going to heat our oil, and as we did before when we did deep frying, we're going to heat it on medium heat, not a real high heat, because we don't want it to heat too fast and to get too hot too fast. And we're going this time to 375 degrees. Okay, now it's time to mix our flour with a pinch of sea salt. How much is a pinch? It's probably about 1/8 to 1/4 of a teaspoon. Just mix that up really well. Now we have a cup of cold water in the bowl here with a few ice cubes in it, which are quickly melting. Now we're going to sift the flour into that water, and we're going to mix it with our cooking chopsticks. Now you might say, why in the world would you mix up this batter with chopsticks? And the reason is you don't really want it to mix very much. You want it to be lumpy. You do not want it to be thoroughly mixed. That is important in making tempura. Okay. So we're just going to mix it up till most of the dryness has been incorporated into the water, but we're not trying to get a smooth batter. We actually want a lumpy batter with some of the flour actually showing and not mixed in. All right, now let's dredge 1 shrimp, 1 mushroom cap, 1 sugar snap pea. And we want to get them coated. And then take them out, shake off the excess. I even just use the cooking chopsticks to get off, you know, the major excess, right? And then we're ready to cook. Okay, so here we have it. We have the tempura shrimp, sugar snap peas and the mushrooms. We have the tempura dipping sauce with daikon, and served this way, and then a plate for everyone to eat with their chopsticks. That's the conclusion of lesson 89, prawn, shiitake, and sugar snap pea tempura. You can see photos of the final dish at my Instagram, which is @Chef's Apprentice, cook like a pro. Next up is tuna tempura. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.